Have you ever looked at an ancient place and thought, there's no way people made this with simple tools? Because some places really do feel impossible. Not just big, not just old, impossible. Places cut into mountains, giant spaces carved underground, perfect steps going deep into the earth. Whole structures that look too precise, too advanced, too strange. Lost civilizations, hidden knowledge, ancient machines, supernatural help, even aliens. That could be true, but the truth is usually more interesting than that. Some of these places might have a real-world explanation, and a few still sit in that strange space where even experts argue. In this video, we're going through 7 ancient discoveries that no one can explain, but I'm still going to try my best. Let's start with a place that looks like geometry dropped into the earth. The Baori stepwell. If you have never seen Baori, it does not look like what most people imagine when they hear the word well. It looks like a giant square opening in the ground, lined with row after row of narrow stairs that repeat in a near perfect pattern. It feels less like a water structure and more like a mathematical object. Official descriptions usually say it has around 3,500 steps. It is deep and designed to reach stored water below ground, while also staying cooler than the surface. That cooler air matters because this was built in a hot, dry region where both water and shade were valuable. Around the stepwells and other water structures, it is common to hear legends that they were built overnight, all with the help of spirits or by forces beyond normal human labor. Another idea that often circles around Baori is that it may once have connected to hidden passages or secret routes. Whether that is true or not, this place has invited imagination for a very long time. Now, if we move away from legend and look at the more real explanations, the claims usually sound familiar. Some say the geometry is too perfect, so it must have been made with advanced cutting tools. Some say it proves lost mathematical knowledge. Baori is a stepwell, a deep water source with stairs, built in a region where water was seasonal and heat was intense. Stepwells were used for drinking, washing, bathing, and sometimes irrigation. They were also social spaces, resting places, and in many cases cool shelters. That cooling effect is not mystical, it is basic physics. Go lower into the earth and temperatures tend to become more stable. So this structure was not only about storing water, it was also about creating a usable environment in extreme heat. The design starts to make more sense once you think about what they actually needed. They needed to reach the water, no matter how low it got. They needed strong walls, so the whole thing wouldn't collapse. And they needed a lot of steps, because as the water dropped, people had to go deeper, so they repeated the same stair pattern again and again. And that's what creates that almost perfect geometric look. So how did they actually build something like this? First, they dug a deep pit down toward the water. Then they reinforced the walls with stones so everything stayed stable. After that, they added layers of steps, repeating the same pattern all the way down. And finally, they built spaces around it, places where people could stand, rest, and safely reach the water. And one more thing matters here. Ancient water structures were often layered projects. They were repaired, expanded, and maintained across generations. That means what looks like one impossible project may actually be the result of long-term use and revision. The real mystery at Baori is not whether humans could build it. They clearly could. The harder question is when exactly the earliest phase was built and by whom. The site is often broadly placed in the 8th to 9th century. Local tradition connects it to King Chanda of the Nikumba dynasty, but the dating is still somewhat broad, because there is not a clean inscription that simply gives us a fixed date and a single named builder. The Yonaguni monument, For this, we have to go underwater. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni Island, there's an underwater formation that looks, at first glance, almost architectural. It has flat terraces, sharp corners, and edges that resemble steps. Because it is underwater, the story almost writes itself. Was there once dry land here? Was there once a structure here? Did part of a city disappear beneath the sea? That is why Yonaguni became famous. Unlike other sacred sites, most of the mythology around Yonaguni is modern. It is tied to ideas of drowned civilizations, lost Pacific continents, and giant ancient monuments swallowed by rising water. Some people describe it as a pyramid, some call it a temple complex. What makes Yonaguni especially interesting is that this is not just a case of wild theories versus clear science. This is one of the rare sites where serious disagreement exists. The scientific explanation actually starts with the rock itself. This area is made of layered stone, and when that kind of rock breaks, it often splits in straight lines. Over time, waves and erosion shape those lines even more, and when all of that comes together, you can end up with flat surfaces and sharp edges that look almost man-made. At least, that is the geological argument. Nature can make something that looks designed. Researchers who think it's natural point out something important. This kind of rock breaks the same way on land too, not just underwater. So you don't need a lost city to explain those straight lines. At the same time, the debate isn't fully settled. Some researchers think the formation could be natural, but changed by humans. Not a giant underwater city, just small adjustments, like using what was already there. The real problem is proving any of this underwater. The rock itself is very old, but that doesn't tell us if people ever touched it. Even if you date things like shells or layers on top, that only tells you when those formed, not when the rock was shaped. And unless there are clear tool marks with real evidence around them, it's very hard to be certain. That is why Yonaguni remains the most debated site in this video. So the safest way to say it is this: nature can surely create something like this on its own. Most geologists think it's mainly natural, but whether humans changed any part of it is still an open question. The Longyou Caves. The Longyou Caves in China feel like the kind of discovery that should not exist without a famous historical record attached to it, but that is exactly what makes them strange. In the early 1990s, locals drained what they thought were ponds and found giant man-made caverns underneath. What looked ordinary on the surface turned out to hide massive underground chambers cut directly into rock. And these aren't rough or random spaces. They're massive. You can see tool marks on the walls. There are pillars holding everything up, shaped ceilings, staircases, and even drainage. It's all clearly planned. The real mystery is not whether people built them. The real mystery is why. That absence of a clear written explanation is what gives the site its strange aura. How can a society excavate chambers on this scale and leave behind so little direct explanation of their purpose? Secret royal bunkers? Hidden armies? Lost civilizations? Engineering studies tell a calmer story. These caves were carved by hand into the rock. They are large, but the builders left pillars to hold everything up. Some walls and ceilings are shaped in a way that keeps them stable. There are even signs of drainage. This wasn't luck, they knew exactly what they were doing. One really interesting idea is that the builders may have tested the rock first. Some studies suggest they made small cuts or tunnels to check how strong it was. And if they found weak areas, they just stopped and moved somewhere else. If that's right, it means they were choosing their spots carefully before building. That's actually really intelligent. As for dating, many researchers place the caves at around 2000 years old, based on the evidence found inside and around them. But as with many underground sites, dating is not perfectly neat. Were these quarries? Maybe, but if so, why are the chambers so carefully shaped? And where did all the removed rock go? Were they storage spaces? Perhaps. but the scale still raises questions. Were they ritual spaces, prestige projects, or some combination of practical and symbolic uses? That is possible too. So right now, the honest answer is this. We understand how they built these caves, but not why. We know people made them. We know how they kept them stable, but we still don't know what they were actually for. The Kailasa Temple. Kailasa Temple at Ellora in India is the kind of place that makes people question their own sense of scale. Because this is not a temple built out of blocks. It is a temple carved out of a mountain. It sits within the Ellora cave complex. And what makes it so famous is that it looks like a freestanding temple with courtyards, pillars, shrines, sculptures, and full architectural form. Except it was created by removing rock from a single mass. The story goes like this. A queen made a vow. The temple had to be built quickly, and a master builder promised that the top would be finished in just a few days. So they started carving from the top down. Instead of tunneling inward, the builders first cut a massive trench into the rock, isolating a block like a giant sculpture waiting to be shaped. Then they carved downward from the top, forming roofs first, then walls, then lower structural and decorative elements as they moved deeper. At first, this sounds almost risky, but then you realize how much planning it takes. They had to know the full design from the very start, because if they made a big mistake, they couldn't just fix it later. Kailasa didn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from a long tradition of carving buildings into rock in India. People had already been carving caves, temples, and monasteries for a long time. Kailasa is just that idea taken to the extreme. The site is generally linked to the Rashtrakuta period, especially the 8th century, and commonly associated with King Krishna I. Inscription evidence around Ellora supports that larger historical setting. The type of rock helped too. The stone at Ellora naturally cracks along certain lines, so the builders could follow those lines to make the work easier. That's what skilled workers do. They work with the stone, not against it. There are still questions, of course. How many workers were involved? How long did the main excavation take? How much of the monument belongs to one ruler's program? And how much was continued or refined later? Those questions are still debated. The Longmen Grottoes. The Longmen Grottoes are not one monument. They are a whole sacred landscape cut into limestone cliffs near Luoyang. Caves, niches, inscriptions, and tens of thousands of Buddhist figures spread across the rock face. It's one of the greatest collections of Chinese art from the late Northern Wei and Tang periods, and that is not hard to believe when you see it. Unlike some of the more uncertain sites on this list, Longmen is historically well grounded. Work began in 493 CE, when Emperor Xiaowen of the Northern Wei moved the capital to Luoyang. From there, the carving continued for centuries. Sometimes it sped up, sometimes it slowed down, depending on who was in power and what was happening at the time. This wasn't built all at once. It came together over time, through years of work and dedication. The rock they used was actually perfect for this, soft enough to carve details, but strong enough to hold its shape. The process itself is pretty clear. They planned the layout, carved into the cliff, shaped the figures, added inscriptions, and kept building over time. What makes Longmen so valuable is that it still has something many sites don't. Inscriptions, names, records, a clear sense of history. That means we can follow not just when it was made, but how the style and ideas changed over time. One of the most fascinating parts of Longmen is that you can actually see time in the stone. Early Northern Wei works often look more slender and severe. Later, Tang works become fuller and more natural. It is not one frozen style, it is a moving artistic tradition. Theories do exist here too. but they are not the main story. The stronger mystery is what was lost. Longmen suffered looting and damage, especially in the modern era. Reliefs were broken off, fragments scattered, and original contexts damaged. From a carved Buddhist landscape in China, we now move to Ethiopia, where the sacred meaning of carved stone is still alive. Lalibela. Lalibela is one of the most extraordinary religious sites in the world. Here, churches don't rise above the ground like you'd expect. Instead, they're carved down into it. You walk through trenches and narrow tunnels, and suddenly a full church appears, cut straight out of the rock. These churches are carved from a single piece of rock. They have doors, windows, columns, floors, and roofs, all cut from the same stone. And they're connected by passages. This isn't just a group of buildings, it's one complete carved system. The most famous story says King Lalibela built a new Jerusalem and that angels helped finish the churches, especially at night. Now that doesn't explain how they were built, but it does show how people saw this place as something holy, something protected, something more than just stone. The real explanation is still impressive on its own. These churches were carved from the top down into the rock. First, they marked out the shape, then cut around it and slowly carved out the inside and outside. At the same time, they had to control water. They added drainage, shaped the ground, and designed everything so rain wouldn't damage it. Because in a place like this, if you don't control water, it won't last. That practical engineering side is part of what makes Lalibela so impressive. It combines sacred architecture with a clear understanding of environmental risk. Ethiopian tradition strongly ties the churches to King Lalibela in the late 12th to early 13th century. But research suggests the story is more layered than a single king building everything in one burst. Some experts think it wasn't all built at once. It may have been done in different stages, possibly over hundreds of years, and some parts might be based on older structures that were already there. And because the site is still a living place of worship, there are limits to what archaeology can do there. It is not a dead ruin. It is active, protected, and religiously important. So some questions remain open, partly because full excavation or intrusive study would not be appropriate. Now we move to the final site, a place where power, engineering, art, and history all come together on one massive rock. Sigiriya. Sigiriya in Sri Lanka looks like the kind of place someone would invent for a story. A massive rock rises out of the flat land. At the top, there was once a palace. Below it, there are gardens, water systems, terraces, and the remains of a huge lion-shaped gateway that once marked the way up. Sigiriya was the capital of King Kailasa I, so we at least have a solid starting point. The main palace phase belongs to the late 5th century, especially between 477 and 495 CE. At one level, it is easy to tell the basic story. A ruler used a natural rock stronghold as the center of a capital and palace. The height gave defensive advantage, the setting created spectacle. The lion gateway added symbolic power. Gardens below shaped the whole approach into a statement of control, design, and royal image. But then you start looking closer at the engineering, especially the water gardens, and the site becomes even more impressive. Researchers see these gardens as a real water system, not just decoration. Water moved through channels and pools using gravity. Everything was carefully planned, so it would flow the right way, and some of it still works today when it rains. So this wasn't just for looks, it actually worked. Water systems can seem so advanced that they've been linked to lost technology. And in some traditions, especially the Ramayana, the site is connected to legendary palaces. But the realistic explanation does also make sense. Ancient engineers did not need machines in the modern sense to create gravity-fed hydraulic systems. They needed observation, terrain knowledge, experimentation, and planning. Sigiriya also has its own artistic mystery. Halfway up the rock, there are ancient paintings, frescoes, showing groups of women floating against a soft, cloud-like background. They're often called the Ladies of Sigiriya, but no one fully agrees on who they are. Are they royal women, celestial beings, cloud maidens, or something more symbolic? Even today, there's no single answer everyone agrees on. Then there's something called the Mirror Wall. It's a polished wall along the path up the rock, where visitors started leaving writings and poems. Some of these go back over 1,000 years. And they matter because they show this place didn't just disappear after the king was gone. People kept coming here, reacting to it, writing about it, and giving it new meaning over time. That's why Sigiriya feels like more than just a fortress. It's a layered place, a royal center, an artistic site, a later religious space, a place of writing and memory, and a piece of engineering all in one. The more you look into these places, the clearer it becomes that ancient people were not less capable than us. They used different tools, but they understood their world in ways that were just as sharp and practical. And in many cases, that's enough to explain what we see. But at the same time, not every detail is fully understood. Maybe there was something more. Maybe there's more to the story than we've been able to uncover. They understood stone. They understood water. They understood how to plan, how to organize, and how to build for the long term. And still, some timelines are unclear. Some purposes are unknown. Some parts are still argued over. And some answers may never come. The mystery doesn't disappear, but it does change shape. And maybe that's what makes these places so fascinating. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.